Hello, today we're going to be comparing Logic's very own Woodwind collection with Spitfire Audio's free version of the BBC Symphony Orchestra. Now we've already compared the strings and the brass with Logic's own, and now we're going to be really just focusing and honing in on the woodwinds. Which is better to use? Both? Should I stick with Logic's own, or should I take the effort to download Spitfire's own? And at the end of the day, it's free. You're not going to be losing out. But let's really go into each instrument and see what we're getting. Now, the first thing you'll instantly notice with the strings and the brass, there's this really nice studio-like look, as you'll probably would have seen in the other videos. Or just to quickly show you, if we click on this, look at the cellos, and bring up the nice little UI, you have this beautiful little UI. While with the woodwind, we've got none of this. But and we definitely don't have all those articulations. Instead, we have the simple Logic sampler, but we still do have a couple of articulations. And if we look in the mapping, we can actually see if we have, yes, as we can see right here, we have a forte sample and a piano sample of at least the staccatos, and then of course we have the legato. And what's nice about the sampler as well, you can adjust the release, which can be really handy to make things sound a little bit more realistic with the legatos. But let's just go straight off. Let's listen to these sounds. We're going to start with the piccolo, and as we can see with both instruments, we have a staccato and a legato, or in the case of BBC Discover, just a long, not actually a legato patch. But let's have a play around, see how it sounds, and get stuck right in. Let's start with Logic's own. We're going to start with staccatos. I'm going to keep it on the mapping windows, just so we can have a look. And let's have a play. Quite beautiful, actually. And you have those two different samples, no round robins, so you can quite easily get that shotgun effect if you're not too careful, especially if you're just working with MIDI and not recording the imperfections that occur when we're physically recording. Let's listen now to BBC Discover, see how it differs. We're just going to go straight off with the staccatos. Now, what I'm instantly noticing is we don't have that second sample for the forte. We just have the one sample. So even when we play nice and loud, it's still the same sample, we're just playing it slightly louder. While over here, noticing I'm having to play an octave higher when it comes to the BBC Discover one to get the same sound effect. Otherwise, both are nice. BBC Discover has this really nice room, while if we look over here on Logic's own, it's a more closer, and you can of course change the reverb. If you look at your mixer, you can see the bus is here. You can change how much reverb's actually being used with this, while over here we can stick more reverb on. But you can't stick less reverb on, which could be a problem, especially if you want the intimate sound. And if you're wanting to go for the intimate sound, you're probably better off with Logic's own. But both sounds are realistic, they both sound nice. But that more intimate one definitely goes towards Logic's own. Now let's move on to the longs. We'll start with our Logic's own. And I'm going to use the expression fader to control how loud and quiet it is. It's nice, it's acceptable, especially when you introduce the expression wheel, which is CC1. You can really bring out that sample a little bit more and make it sound a lot more realistic. If you like vibrato, this sample is perfect for you. You can't control the vibrato. and if you're holding it for a long time, you can hear the loop. But other than that, quite a nice sample, and you can definitely get away with it. Now let's move on to our longs in BBC Discover, and this time we can use both dynamic and expression. I'm just going to use the dynamic fader for now. You really get that breathy, airy feel with Spitfire's one here. Wow, let's go down. While we get a purer sound with Logic's own, more vibrato, less airy. Both are very acceptable samples, and of course you could do chordal patterns with these as well. Both are acceptable. Honestly, a lot would depend on the project for which one I would personally use. If I'm going for a more intimate sound, I think I would go for Logic's own, but I really like the breathiness, the airiness, the room and the space that we get with BBC Discover. It's still, that long is nice and close actually, I feel, a bit closer almost than the shorts. But let's move on from the piccolo and see what we get with the flutes. Swap that over, and of course over here. So we have a flute solo and a group of flutes. So let's just compare, see if we notice much of a difference. We'll just go with the shorts. So this is the flute solo. And this is the group of flutes. Let's put that on the short. So it's louder, and I am noticing it sounds like there's a group within the stereo field. There's still quite a nice stereo image with the solo, but we definitely get a sense of more with the ensemble. So instantly we have a bit of variation there, while with BBC Discover we only have a group of three. So let's stick with the solo for a second. Quickly play that staccato patch again and go with BBC Discover and play the shorts there. Ooh. You really get a sense of an ensemble there, and I think with all the BBC Discover's instruments, I really like the sense of space, the room, especially when you're wanting to do a bigger orchestral piece. You really get a sense of how many instruments there are. There's a lot. It's not a small ensemble, which is cool. Let's quickly look at the flutes staccatos again and compare those. Yeah, definitely you get more depth and more airy sort of sound. Let's move on to the longs quickly and see what we get with these. Start with Logic Zone. Again, I'm using CC1. I'm also noticing Logic's own are quite velocity sensitive as well, while BBC Discover is definitely not velocity sensitive. So as well as the expression we have with the Logic's own flute, how hard you hit the keyboard will also affect the sound. So similar to how in the BBC Discover we have the expression and dynamic fader, instead of having the dynamic and expression fader with Logic's own, you have the expression fader, but the dynamic is controlled by the velocity. So depending how you like to work, if you're working just with MIDI, it might be more beneficial for you to work with BBC Discover's flutes or instruments, while if you're one for actually physically hammering on a keyboard and recording stuff in, it might be more beneficial for you to use Logic's own, because then you'll get that velocity and then you can control it a little bit more with the expression. So we're getting two parts of the stage here, and two different styles of almost composing, you could say. Okay, let's move on. I liked both sounds. Again, more space, more area with BBC Discover, but the flute is still very acceptable within Logic. You could use both, and so far that is what I'm recommending, but we've not gone far at all. So let's move on to the oboes and see what's going on here. Okay, so we only have oboe. Is that singular or group? Probably a group, but it says oboe, so probably singular. Let's find out. What do we got? Oh, 3. So we have 2 with BBC Discover. We have a vibrato patch as well, and then of course our 2 different staccato samples. So, and I think that's the same for the flute. I think that's quite consistent throughout the woodwinds, is we always have the piano and forte staccato, while with BBC Discover you don't get round robins, which you don't get with Logic either, but you don't have those 2 different samples. You have the singular sample. Right, let's get stuck in with Logic's own with the shorts, where I like to start, and just have a quick comparison. So here is our oboe. Very reedy, very narrow. The reverb sounds fake. No sense of space. I don't like that at all. Sounds like a bad synthesizer patch. I don't like that. Okay, let's BBC Discover. See, that's... You see what I mean? The Logic's own feels like a shorter sample, while BBC Discover sounds like a staccato, while Logic sounds like a spizzicato. It's quite quiet as well, but you can mess with the volume button up there. I'm not a big fan of these 2 patches, personally, either BBC Discover or Logic's. I think I'm a less fan of Logic's because the reverb doesn't sound quite right, and it's just a bit too reedy for me. If that's what you're after, there you go. I really do, again, like the space that comes with the BBC Discover. It's a shame because when we look at the Pro version, it's so different, especially with the flute. I recently did a piano and flute solo piece, and the mock-up, of course, was just with a piano, and I was just using the solo flute from BBC Pro, and the amount of shaping you can really do and get really into the nitty-gritty aspects of it and the different samples that come with it. You have so much choice, and every note you can almost pick a specific articulation for it. And of course, then you have the expression and dynamic wheels and the different microphones positioned, so you can really bring it up to this really intimate sound. And I was just amazed at how realistic the mock-up came out with simply just the singular BBC Pro Symphony Orchestra Pro version. And I wouldn't judge the Pro version of the Discover. It really is. It's a free version of a £500+ product. So this BBC Discover doesn't really give its bigger brother the credit it deserves, but ultimately it is a free version of it. So on with the rant. Let's move on to our longs. I'm not a big fan of those shorts. Same with the oboe. The oboe is such a beautiful instrument, and these patches do not give it credit. Let's go with the legato. I'm betting it's going to be quite flat. We're going to start with the Logic Zone and using our CC1. quite nice, and especially if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty and go between the two, vibrato and legato. Quite a loopy vibrato, not much variation within it, but when you combine it with the legato, I bet that'd be a really nice combination. I like that you have the option, because sometimes, like for example, if BBC Discover had too much vibrato on it and I wanted a more flatter, neutral sound, you're not going to get it. So let's see what it sounds like. It sounds more like an ensemble. Yeah, it's oboe solo. We don't actually have an ensemble. And you can definitely feel the ensemble here with BBC Discover. That's quite nice. Again, beautiful space. I'm loving the options I'm getting with Logic's Ohm, but both have their pros and their cons. BBC Discover, great space, but we're lacking articulations, we're lacking options, while Logic's Own, we're missing that realism with the reverb, but you really have this quite nice, intimate close-up sound. Let's move on from our oboes and go into our clarinets and see what's happening here. So we have clarinet solo and clarinet ensemble. I'm betting we're probably going to see something very similar to what we saw with the flutes. We'll just have a quick look at the staccatos to prove the point. So solo. I really like that fortissimo. You really hear the force, which is really nice, having that variation in notes, because we have those two samples. So even though there's no round robins, you can still go between the two and really tell the difference. But yeah, that sounds like a singular instrument. Still a nice stereo field there. Clarinets, so multiple. This is of course Logic's Own. Yeah, you can hear that right there. If you're wearing headphones, it'll be more obvious. You can hear there's more than one clarinet playing there. And I bet we'll see something very similar with this one, but with some nice space. Ooh, and placement as well. And it's a very sharp, short sound. It's kind of funny, actually. Was it the flutes? Yeah, I think the flutes, it was the other way around. Logic's Own had a shorter sound, while the BBC Discover had a longer sound. With the clarinet, we're seeing the opposite, which has its benefits and disadvantages, especially if we're just using entirely BBC Discover and our shorts, some have different lengths. If you really want a sharp moment, it's going to be to your disadvantage. But if you really want a lot of realism, not every single instrumentalist is going to play the note at the exact same length for staccato. And so you can have that little bit of variation where the flutes are going to sound slightly longer than the clarinet, so you can really bring out a bit more realism within your piece. But I'm really liking BBC Discover's clarinet. But we're lacking that second fortissimo recording, which I'm really liking within Logic. But if you want to play a little bit quicker, you can really get a sharper, tighter sound with BBC Discover within its clarinet patch. Longs, let's move on to our longs. And do we have no vibrato patch? So it's just the two articulations, sadly. Ooh, I love how intimate that is. Beautiful. And all I was doing was messing with CC1 and playing a bit of chordal pattern. I'm not going to lie, that clarinet just blew me away. You probably can tell I played it a bit longer than I normally do with the other ones. That's beautiful. I would compare that to some paid clarinets. And this is something I found with just messing around with these Logic samples, is they're underutilized. A lot of people think they need to go out and spend so much money when they're not using the products they already have within the software they've already paid £200+ for. Logic does have some beautiful samples. And I have a friend, when I was doing my degree, when she was doing her film and media pieces for the course, she would mostly use Logic sounds, and she was really good at tweaking them and getting them to sound their very best. And even the lecturer was literally asked my friend, "What sample libraries have you bought?" And she was like, "I'm just using Logic's own stuff," which really shows you can trick a professional film media composer to really make these sounds sound good, but you really need to get into the nitty-gritty details of them. And don't underestimate Logic's own sounds. That clarinet alone, absolutely beautiful. Let's try and do something similar with BBC Discover. I bet we're not going to get that same intimate sound though, just simply because of the room. Honestly, both beautifully sampled. But I really like the intimacy and the closeness that we get off of Logic's own. And I've just realized throughout this video, I've been saying I've been using CC1. I'm lying. It's actually CC11 for the expression. CC1 is dynamic, so I apologize for that. And I just double checked because I was looking over the clarinet and realized right here it says it does say it's CC11. So for expression, CC11, for dynamic, CC1. My apologies there. Let's now move on from our beautiful clarinets and finish it off with our bassoons. And it's a solo bassoon, and it's a A3, so an ensemble of 3 bassoons within BBC Discover. Now let's have a quick mess around with our solo within Logic. And do we have multiple articulations? Yes, we have a vibrato patch as well. As always, I like starting with my staccatissimos, so let's have some fun. Probably should play nice and low. So, forte, piano. Very easy to do with a shotgun effect with this one. Not the biggest. It sounds a lot more realistic with its reverb. Bassoon, nice for comedic pieces. Let's compare that. Definitely got a bit more depth there, a lot quieter. Very quiet compared to the other one. I don't really use the bassoon. The one time I have used it as a solo instrument was for a comedic piece, so I definitely wouldn't recommend either of these patches for using it as a solo, but great for ensemble. A lot closer sound with Logic's own, but we found that quite consistent throughout the woodwinds and probably most of the instruments within this patch or within this library. Now let's go and move swiftly on to our legatos. I'm intrigued to see how the vibrato varies with the legato patch here, so let's have a play. And we'll use CC11, not CC1. Struggling a bit with the performance aspect of this one. Not as playable as the others, I'm finding. Let's move on to the actual vibrato patch within this. Nice if you're going to go between the two, so I guess you've got that variation with the longs there, which can be very handy. Let's move on. I like the release on BBC Discover. The other one I was feeling it was a bit very fingery in style, no sliding. It just kind of came off a bit sudden. Yeah, I like you can hear them all coming off almost at a different time, right at the end, very slightly. Okay, so that's kind of a look at all our wind instruments here, and they're all within, if you look here, orchestral and woodwind patch, they're all within the sampler, so you can tweak them a little bit if you want to tweak the releases, and of course it gives you, well, what you actually need to control it, so expression and velocity control this one. I guess you could change that if you wanted to the mod wheel, instead of, if that's the way you want to compose, so you can have it almost exactly like BBC Discover. For a more intimate sound, go with Logic. For a more bigger instrumental piece, orchestral piece, go for BBC Discover. But my piece of advice is use both, because the larger the pot of samples you have to choose from, the more bits of realism you can really bring out, instead of just having the same sample almost be repeated. If you use multiple instruments, you can make it sound a lot more realistic, and if you have both playing at the same time, you can pick out almost these different oboes, one slightly closer, one slightly further away, really give the piece some depth. So overall, use both. I really don't like the clarinet patch. Was it the oboe? Sorry, it's the oboe patch. The clarinet was my favourite patch. There we go. I hope this video has been helpful. This is a comparison, I guess, and a bit of my advice when using these two patches. Don't underestimate Logic. Don't just go and say, oh, BBC Discover's way better. Use both, have some fun, mess around with them, see what is more your style. Use the instrument that best fits your piece, and at least for you, sounds like the style you're composing in, or is the most realistic. But I hope you enjoyed this video. I think we have one more on this series looking at the percussion aspect of BBC Discover and comparing it with Logic's own, and then we'll move on and talk about something else. Let me know if you want me to talk about anything specific. But again, I hope you've enjoyed. Like this video, subscribe if you want more, and I'll see you in the next video.